Good morning, good afternoon, in whatever part of the country you're from. We're glad that you're here. Thanks so much for joining for today's session on elder justice. My name is Amy Herrera. I'm a special agent at the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office. And before I hand the virtual microphone over to my colleague and friend, I have just a couple of administrative announcements for all of you to hear about today. First off, yes, we are recording the webinar today. When the webinar is done, the recording will be accessible in two different spots. One spot will be the InfraGard portal. So thanks to all of you who are InfraGard members who are on the line today. The InfraGard recording will be up probably in the next 1 or 2 days. The recording will also go up on a section of the FBI's website. That process is a little more cumbersome, takes a bit more time. So when that recording is available for all of you to watch on fbi.gov, I'll send an email to everyone, so all of you will know that the webinar is there to be shared with any of your friends and relatives. Secondly, we are not issuing continuing education credits. If you're attending today to earn continuing education credits for your job, know that tomorrow you'll get a certificate through an email that says that you attended today. So you can take that certificate and submit it to whatever organization typically would issue your continuing education credits, and you can get credit that way for attending today's session on elder justice. Third, this session is very much designed to be interactive. So as you have questions, please do type them in the question box. I see that many of you have already started, so yay for that. We will get to as many questions as we can, probably more towards the end of Jamie's presentation. So questions will be forthcoming, answers will be forthcoming too. So type them in as they occur to you. We do have today a couple of handouts for you as reference materials. One of those handouts is about this elder justice series. Today is the first in the series. Next Monday, there'll be a second in the series. The following Monday, which is the 23rd, there'll be another in the same series. So if you're interested in hearing more on the topic of elder fraud and scams that are particularly impacting older adults, please join us for those other 2 sessions as well. If you're a member of the media and you're joining today, fantastic. We're so glad to have you. If you're looking to do a story about what you hear today, please reach out directly through the chat box or the question box, and we'll connect you to some of our public information officers here in my office. There will be some press releases going out, I think next week, that are related to the same topic. So more to come on that. Finally, a huge thank you to all of the organizations that are co-sponsoring this Elder Justice series. So those organizations include the National Capital Region chapter of InfraGard. Thank you, InfraGard NCR. Also our friends at the ABA Foundation, at the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and AARP. Thanks to all of you for being part of this effort to spread awareness about the scams that are impacting older adults. I think that's it for the admin for today. Whew, that was a lot. So without further ado, I am very happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Jamie Daly. She's been a special agent with the FBI since 2015 and is assigned to our Washington field office, as I am. She works on a complex financial crimes squad that investigates securities and investment fraud. And Jamie is the elder fraud coordinator for our office, so she knows a lot about this. She also serves as a certified negotiator for our crisis negotiation team. And before she came to us at the FBI, she was in a variety of accounting and finance roles. She maintains an active CPA license and is a certified fraud examiner. So, Jamie, my highly credentialed friend, I happily turn the virtual microphone over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to listen to this presentation. As you can see from the slide and probably from what you read before today, the presentation is going to focus on a case that I worked along with some others about, a case against an individual by the name of Keisha Williams. And as you can see in the bottom left, I will not take full credit for this. While I am the only one presenting today, I did present with my colleague, Sherry Queener, who used to work in this office, and the case was prosecuted by Assistant United States Attorneys Grace Hill and Jack Hanley. Today's presentation will focus on an investment fraud case that I worked a few years ago. I'm going to walk you through how one woman, Keisha Williams, conned approximately 50 victims, including a significant number of older victims, out of approximately $5.4 million. The focus today is going to be on mainly two of those victims who were both in their late 60s and early 70s at the time of this fraud and throughout our investigation. It'll also focus on the lies that Keisha told people, including these victims, in order to keep her scheme going. You will see how Keisha traveled the world and lived a life of luxury, and this was all done at the expense of her victims, who ended up losing everything they had. It really is a sad story, but my hope is that by hearing what these victims went through and seeing what people are capable of doing to other people, including people who they call their friends, maybe it will prevent you and others from falling victim to similar frauds. All right. So this is the case presentation overview. This is just a summary of what I plan to cover today. We're going to go through how the case was referred to us and how it turned into something completely different. I will talk about Shirley Jo Sanders, who you will hear me refer to as Joe throughout the presentation. She was one of our victims. We did an undercover operation. Another individual who was our largest victim and also ended up getting himself charged was Christian DeAndrade, who you will hear me refer to as Chris throughout the presentation. I will talk about the search warrant that we executed at Keisha Williams' residence and her arrest. I will talk about, really quickly, just some financial analysis that was done and a reverse proffer that we did with Keisha Williams. She ended up going to trial, so I will run through that. And then lastly, we'll talk about her sentencing and what the judge ordered her to. So to begin, So to begin with the initial case referral, this actually came to us, the FBI, as something completely different than what my investigation ended up being. So I'm just going to really quickly touch on this just so you guys understand how this came to us, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We got a referral complaint from an individual in Wisconsin who claimed they were a client of Keisha Williams through her business, Keisha Williams and Associates Consulting, KWAC for short. This individual said that they entered into a $1 million contract and sent a $1 million payment to KWAC in order for Keisha Williams to perform some consulting work for their business. We looked into it for a couple months and it ended up being a civil issue, unfortunately, and there wasn't really anything that we, the FBI, could do for a criminal case. And at that point, you would think, case closed, close this referral, move on. But no, not me. That's not really my style. And I happened to see that Keisha Williams was receiving a number of payments from other individuals and other businesses that were not related to this. So I thought, let me look into this a little bit further, realizing that, the initial referral was civil, but we might have something else here. So I did. So I began looking at the financials, and like I mentioned, I saw a number of payments coming in from people, mainly in California, but there was one victim in particular who resided in Virginia. And that person was Shirley Jo Sanders, who went by Joe for short. So in looking at the bank records for Keisha Williams, I saw incoming wires and checks being deposited into her bank accounts from this woman, Joe. And it was very vague. It didn't give a description for what it was for. So I thought, let me just go talk to Joe and see what this is. Maybe it's nothing, but let me just see. So I called Joe, who lived here locally in Virginia, and I asked if she would meet with me at a local coffee shop, and she did. No questions asked. She agreed to meet with me. And I began asking her what these payments were that she was sending to Keisha Williams. And she began giving me the story. She explained that she knew Chris DeAndrade for about 7 years, and she had worked for him at one of his companies that he had. He was a self-starter, successful businessman, and he had an IT company that had a lot of government contracts. And Joe worked for Chris for many years until she was diagnosed with cancer. She was diagnosed with cancer in 2012, and she had to quit working, unfortunately, but Chris was just so kind and was like a brother to her that he allowed her to receive disability payments through his company for about 18 months, just to take care of her financially. And fast forward, we're in 2017, and Chris, through his business, had discovered a software, a telehealth software overseas in Austria that he wanted to acquire for his business. And he was raising money from other individuals because it was quite costly. So he went to Joe and he asked Joe if she would be willing to invest in this project, in this software. And Joe, being the woman who she is and such a sweet, kind lady wanting to help her friends, she agrees. She says, absolutely, Chris, you know I would do anything for you. You're like a brother to me. And over time, Joe invested approximately $300,000 of her life savings into this investment opportunity. And when I asked her why the money was going to Keisha instead of going to Chris, if this was for his business, if this was his opportunity, she explained that Keisha was an attorney who was helping Chris get this software out of Austria. So at the time, it made sense. In addition to Joe, she also got her ex-husband, who was a former Netflix executive, to invest $30,000, and she also got her significant other to invest $70,000 into this business opportunity. And all of this, everybody who invested, when they were interviewed, they all basically said the same thing, that the reason they did this, the reason they invested their money was because of Chris. It had nothing to do with Keisha. It was Chris, that they trusted Chris and they wanted to help him. The money happened to be going to Keisha as the attorney for Chris, but they were doing this for Chris. And during this interview, Joe told me a story about, and this was before I knew anything really about Keisha Williams. And Joe tells me this story about how Keisha called her one day saying that she needed $4,000 and she needed it in cash. So Keisha told Joe to just leave the cash with the bartender at Wildfire in Tyson's Corner. And Sanders is telling me this, Joe Sanders, and she's like, absolutely not, Keisha. I'm not leaving cash with a bartender. This sounds like a drug deal. I'm not doing this. And so after a lot of back and forth, Keisha finally agreed to meet with Joe in the parking lot of Wildfire. So Joe explains to me that she goes to this parking lot and meets with Keisha. And they talked for about 30 minutes after Joe gave Keisha this cash. And they talked about being Christians, and they talked about Joe's cancer. And Keisha was just very kind to Joe. And Keisha gives Joe a hug and a kiss on the cheek before she leaves and takes off with her money. And all along, Joe's thinking that this money is going to benefit Chris and help his company and to get this software. Little did she know what Keisha was actually doing with the money, which I will get to. So hearing all of this, a concern for me as an investigator is, what is Chris's role? So that was very unclear to us early on. And I was a little bit concerned that Chris might actually be involved in this. I was able to see that all the money was going to Keisha, and the spending of the money was setting off red flags. And I will go over how she spent the money later on, but I just had this uncertainty about Chris's role. So during this interview with Joe, I was explaining to her that there was some concern. I know that she trusts Chris and he's like a brother to her, but we need to figure out what's really going on here. And we needed to hear the pitch from Keisha without going to her as the FBI. So Joe agreed to cooperate with us and come up with a story for us to be able to introduce an undercover. So we did that, and Joe came up with a backstory about how she knew someone that knew someone who invested money for their family, and they might be interested in this opportunity. So we got the undercover introduced, and I'll go over that in the next slide. And Joe ended up being a key witness to us at trial. So we get the undercover introduced through Joe. She did the pass off, and the undercover first had to go through Chris. So there were a few calls with Chris, but at the end goal was to try to get to Keisha. So after a lot of back and forth, we were able to get Keisha on the phone and talk to our undercover. They eventually met in person as well. And at Keisha's choice, they met at Eddie V's in Tyson's Corner, which for those of you around here know that's a pretty high-end area and an expensive restaurant. And the undercover met Keisha at this restaurant, and we went there to surveil and watch and make sure everything was safe. And we learned this throughout the investigation, but this was our first time witnessing this. But in true Keisha Williams style, she rolls up to this restaurant in her Mercedes and parks it right out front. This restaurant, I believe, really only offers valet unless you park far away, but she rolls right up in front and gives her car to valet. And then after the meeting, she tips the valet driver $100 in cash. And we learned later that she would do that constantly just to show off her wealth. And she would have the driver park her car out front because she wanted everyone to see her get in and get out of the vehicle. But I'm going to go ahead and play some clips of the calls and the meetings with Keisha. These are clips from our undercover, just to hear sort of the story that she was telling, because this was our first time really getting to hear it in her own words. So I'm going to play those, and bear with me just 1 second so I can get the audio.
Chris and I bought a telehealth company from Austria. It's a telehealth company. They're FDA level 2 approved. The company has a lot of intellectual property, a lot of patents, and we can actually send you information about the software to look at the existing technology now and where our future technology is going once we get the software out of escrow back to the U.S. So what we need immediately, we've acquired the company. We spent our own cash on it, Chris and I together. We have it here in escrow with our attorney. We have some outstanding tax liabilities. We were looking for a bridge loan so that when we get the software back to the U.S.
Are you in the area?
You want to ask you how much you guys acquired?
I'm actually in Austria right now. We acquired the company for a little bit more than, Chris, you know exactly the numbers? We spent a lot of our, and this was all our, cash.
Are you in the area, Keisha, anytime?
I'm actually in Austria right now. I'm in Europe right now.
Okay.
All right, so that might have been a little hard to hear, but just to give you a quick overview, that is Keisha Williams explaining to the undercover a little bit about the software. And you might have heard her say that the software is overseas in Austria. So that's the story that she is telling everyone, that this software, this telehealth software, is being held overseas in Austria, and they need all this money to get it released. We later learned that that's not true, and I'll talk about that later. We actually spoke with the attorney in Austria who was trying to sell this software, and he had a very different story than what Keisha was telling everyone. And then in that last clip, you might have heard, and if you didn't, Keisha says, or the undercover is asking Keisha where she is, basically, and she says, I'm in Europe, I'm in Austria right now. That was not true. And we didn't know at the time, but we later learned, and I'll cover that in my next slide, during the interview of Chris, was that she was telling Chris that she was in Austria and she was actually being detained because they hadn't paid all these fees that were due. So she really kept up this crazy story that they had to pay all this money and that she was being held and detained and locked up in Austria. And we hear her kind of keep that story going on this recording with the undercover. So at this point, we had interviewed Joe, we had introduced this undercover, and we heard in Keisha's own words what she was telling people about the software. And at this point, it's still a little bit unclear what Chris's role is, because he was on these calls and these meetings with the undercover and Keisha. So he's hearing her tell people all of this, and he is in fact passing along the same information. But still unclear if he is in on it with her or if he is just a pawn that she is using. So we decide that it's time to interview Chris. And logistically, we're in Virginia, he's in California. There was a little bit of trouble pinning him down at a certain location. So we decided we're gonna go ahead and take the risk and give him a call ahead of time to try to set something up using a ruse. So I called Chris, and knowing that he was in a business that did a lot of government contracting, I said I was with the FBI and that we were trying to set something up to do a background investigation for someone that used to work at his company. Believable enough, he agrees. We fly out to California to meet with him. So during this interview, we get his story. And the story from Chris's perspective is that he located the software that was being sold in Austria, and it was equivalent to a company in the US going bankrupt. The laws are a little different in Austria, so it wasn't exactly that, but that's the closest that we could really pinpoint it to. So this company is going bankrupt, and they have a telehealth software. And Chris wanted to start getting into the telehealth industry through his business. So he thought this was a great opportunity. So Chris had already met Keisha Williams in the past through a mutual acquaintance, and he decided to loop her into it to help him acquire the software. So Keisha offered to travel to Austria to meet with the company that was selling the software. And Chris agreed to pay for her travel. So Keisha does, she travels over to Austria and she meets with this attorney in Austria that was selling the software, Dr. Roland Dysenberger. So we'll talk about him a little bit later, but she meets with him, and when Keisha gets back, she tells Chris that it went great, we're gonna get this software, but it's going to cost $3 million. That was not true. When we spoke with Dr. Dysenberger in Austria, he said that Keisha did go travel to Austria to meet with him, and she entered into a contract to acquire the software for about $1 million. So when Chris hears this news, that is a lot more money than he really expected to pay. So he knew it was going to take him some time to come up with the money. And Keisha really used that to her advantage, knowing that this was going to take time. So she came up with this whole story about how there was going to be interest and tax liabilities that would be accruing if they didn't get the funds by a certain date, which was not true. But she really used that to put the pressure on Chris. And what we saw later in the evidence that we uncovered through text messages was that Keisha put the pressure on Chris every day. It was 24/7, where she was constantly blasting him with text messages saying, we need $57,000. We need $102,000. If we don't get this money, we're going to lose everything. All the money that we've already paid, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose the software. And it got out of control. By the time we were interviewing Chris, it had been about $5 million that Chris and his family and friends had put into this. And the justification was that they weren't paying on time and the interest and tax liabilities were accruing, which was just completely false. And prior to going out to interview Chris, we had seen Keisha Williams's travel records, and we saw that just a couple weeks before our interview, she was in Italy. So during this interview with Chris, we were trying to get him to believe us, really, that we think she is lying to him, and he refused. We became the enemy, and he didn't want to hear anything we had to say. And when we asked him, well, Chris, where do you think Keisha was in the last couple weeks? Like, where do you think she was? And very confidently, he just responds to us and he goes, oh, well, she was in Florida with her mom. And he explained how Keisha had been very ill and that she had been having trouble with her eyes. And her mom had to drive her to Florida for treatment. He said that her eyes were so bad that she was unable to fly because of the pressure, which kind of made us laugh and say, Chris, that's a lie. She can absolutely fly. She was in Italy. You can't get to Italy without flying. I mean, you could, but she didn't. So he got very angry when we were telling him this, and he kept saying, no, she would not lie. I trust her with my life. And he repeated that multiple times throughout the interview, that he trusted her with his life. And we just couldn't comprehend it, because we were seeing a very different picture than what he was seeing. But she really manipulated him into believing that this was going to happen and that everything she was saying was true. So after the interview was over, we had a search warrant for Chris's phone, and we seized that. And at the time, he was pretty mad about it, understandably. But in the end, it actually ended up helping him more than anything, because it just further proved that Keisha was the liar and she was running the show, not him. We were able to see that she was texting him these completely absurd demands for, needing this money and needing it immediately, needing it in the next 24 to 48 hours, or everything was going to be lost. And then we were able to see, after Keisha would send Chris a text like this, that he would then turn around and start reaching out to his contacts, passing along this message, seeing if he could come up with the money. So we were really able to start seeing that he was just a pawn in her game, and she was just using him for her own benefit. So we asked Chris, did you tell Keisha you were coming here today? And he said, yes, he told her the FBI wanted to talk to him. He didn't mention the background investigation to her, and which was a little upsetting, but so she's blowing up his phone. The entire interview, she's blowing up his phone because we were in there quite a while. So he calls her after the interview while we're still in the room. We're like, just call her back. Let's hear what she has to say. And she just starts screaming at him. And I wanted to play that clip for you guys, but I couldn't. There were way too many expletives, and someone was gonna get mad at me if I did that. But just screaming at him, where have you been? I thought they detained you, and just all kinds of craziness, which if you're not doing anything wrong, I don't know why you would think that the FBI would be detaining you during an interview. So that was a little bit wild. And then after that, Chris agrees to cooperate with us. And I say ... sort of, because he told us he was going to cooperate, and he left the interview that day, making us believe that he was going to cooperate to help himself out. And by cooperate, I mean record his further conversations with Keisha. So we left that day thinking that that's what was going to happen. That is not what happened. So we later found out that after the interview, he had told Keisha that we were asking about her, and she told him that they needed to get throw phones or burner phones and he needed to stop using his phone because the FBI was tapping his phone, which was not true. We were doing no such thing. So then that takes us to fast forward a couple weeks after our interview of Chris. We then find out that Keisha had booked a flight to Mexico. So up until this point, we knew that Keisha was aware that Chris had been interviewed by the FBI. We knew that Chris was not truly cooperating with us, like he said. We knew that Keisha was fleeing, or not fleeing. We knew she was traveling to Mexico, and she didn't really have a whole lot of ties to Virginia. In fact, she was never home. She didn't really have a family. She had nothing really keeping her here. So the concern to us at this point, knowing everything we knew, was, is she fleeing the country, or is this just another one of her lavish trips? So we decided to go ahead and move forward with the arrest. We had enough evidence at that point, and we arrested her at the airport as she was departing. At the time of her arrest, we seized her phone, which contained approximately 195,000 text messages, which were all evidence of her lies to Chris. And upon her arrest, she was detained for a little while. So the next two audio clips are her jail calls, where she is essentially blaming Chris. She's on the phone with her girlfriend, and she is telling her girlfriend that Chris owed her money. So I'm going to go ahead and play those real quick.
Hello. Hey. Call my mom that she needs to contact Chris and tell him that he needs to pay me my $4.some million ASAP. We'll call her and tell her to make sure she contacts him and tells him that he needs to get that money that he owes me to my attorney's trust account.
Okay. Okay.
ASAP, no plan. I don't care how he has to get it, he needs to get it. I don't care.
All right, so if that didn't come through clearly, she's telling her girlfriend Chris owes her $4.5 million and he needs to get it ASAP, and she doesn't care how he gets it, he just needs to get it. And I know this looks like a lot, and I'm just real quick going to highlight a few things on here. So these are some of the text messages that were obtained from Keisha's phone. So the ones with the white background are outgoing messages from Keisha to Chris, and then the ones in gray are Chris back to Keisha. And just to give you a flavor for some of their conversations, and this is just October 4th to October 6th. And this is just a clip. This was just nonstop for 2 years, these messages. You'll see, so here Keisha's telling Chris she borrowed someone's phone and she's using her chip. So at this point, this is when Keisha is telling Chris that she is locked up in Austria. She's being detained. She's saying, I need to get out of here. It looks like I'm going to be locked up. And in that first gray text there, you can sort of feel Chris's desperation. He says K, which he called her for Keisha. Where the hell am I going to find money? I keep looking. You know my position here. I lost both houses as of today. I don't know what else I can do. And Chris did. He lost everything he had in this effort to acquire this software. And you'll see her response, it was always this. When Chris started saying that he's lost everything, he's suffering, immediately Keisha tells him, I've lost everything as well, including my freedom. And down at the bottom left there, she's saying, we need 150,000 by tomorrow. And then over to the right, I've highlighted, she tells Chris, I've been here going on 8 weeks and I'm tired of this. So that was the point where she had been telling Chris that she was detained in Austria. So we see this and we say, okay, on October 6th, she's telling Chris she's been here for 8 weeks. So let's back up 8 weeks and see what she is telling other people. And on this slide, this represents text messages that Keisha is telling everyone else, not Chris. And again, I'll just quickly hit on them since I know we're getting short on time. So we have Keisha telling people she's trying to pick a place to go. It's a toss-up between Bora Bora and the Maldives. She's telling someone, can you go ahead and block the villa for us? Someone's asking, what are the dates for the birthday trip? And Keisha tells them it's the 1st through the 10th. That's September 1st through September 10th. And in October, she's supposedly locked up in Austria. She's asking if the presidential suite is available for their trip. And then down towards the bottom in gray, someone's responding to her, telling her that the price for Tahiti was going to be $6,450 each. And Keisha's telling someone that she has the biggest villa on the island, and Tracy Morgan and Carlton Banks are there, but she's got the biggest villa on the island, and she's sending out these photos to all of her friends. Sorry, my mouse is tricky. Okay, and then just another example of really her lies. So I mentioned when we interviewed Chris that a couple weeks before Keisha had been in Italy. So these text messages were during that time frame where Keisha is in Italy. So up at the top there, Keisha's telling Chris she is at the doctor having all these health issues. And meanwhile, Keisha's telling somebody else that she's leaving on Monday for Italy. She wants the Vista Suite in Rome. And she's saying, make sure we get the best views of Rome, January 9th through the 14th. So that was just a couple weeks before we interviewed Chris. And then later that day, she's telling Chris that she is in major pain and she's been at the doctor for 6 hours and she's exhausted. Not even a minute later, after she's telling Chris that she's in major pain and she's been at the doctor for 6 hours, she is texting her girlfriend to meet her at Sweetwater, which is a restaurant. Then she's bragging down at the bottom saying, Rome, here we come. I booked everything already. I love my coat for Rome and I got a new fresh jean jacket for the trip too. So she's having a great time with everyone else. It just continues. At the top there, you'll see she texts Chris and says, I'm a sick mess today, boss. And that was really a psychological thing that we saw a lot, was that she referred to Chris as boss, basically giving him a sense of control when he had no control. And I'm going to fast forward through these because we're running out of time. That is her in Italy. I'm going to skip this one, I think. Okay, so she raised about $5.4 million for this software project. She really got essentially no other money during this time period other than money from these investors. And this slide depicts really how she spent the money. And you'll see that she spent about $1.1 million in travel expenses and about 1.1 in various retail related expenses. She bought a lot of high-end clothing, shoes, and if you look maybe 6 lines down, the total money that she actually sent to Austria was less than $300,000. Okay, so in speaking about the money that she spent on high-end retail, we did a reverse proffer, and for those of you who might not be familiar with that, what that is, essentially it is the government presenting the evidence that they have on a case to the defendant. So shortly before this reverse proffer, we saw a text message that Keisha sent to her girlfriend saying, I got me a Bottega Veneta legal brief. You can use it. I'll let you pick your own out. I literally bought it just so you could have it for this trip. And that was right before the Italy trip. I had no idea what Bottega Veneta was prior to this case because I am not that fancy, but I later learned that it is a high-end Italian retailer, and she paid $1,800 for this legal brief. And she had the nerve to bring it with her to this reverse proffer in meeting with the government. She then goes to trial because the evidence we presented during the reverse proffer, according to her, was not sufficient enough to make her believe that this was not going to end well. So we go to trial. We had a number of witnesses testify, including Chris and including Joe Sanders. And this part of the trial was very difficult. Joe Sanders, I mentioned she had cancer, and she got to trial and was really struggling with her health at that time. Her cancer had advanced pretty far, and she had to be wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair, and she needed assistance getting up to the stand because she was so weak and fragile, and she was moaning from the pain while getting onto the witness stand. And it was tough to watch. The jury was tearing up. I was getting teary-eyed watching her suffer and have to, it's bad enough to have to suffer through cancer, something as awful as that, but then having to be put through someone just stealing your money from you. And she was at the point where she couldn't even afford her medical bills. And it was just devastating to watch. But she got up there and she testified against Keisha, and she did a great job. It was very significant testimony. And on day 2 of the trial, Keisha's attorney came over to the government table and basically said, she's had enough. She has seen enough. We would like to end this. And he asked for a plea deal on day 2 of the trial, to which we said, absolutely not. You have had many opportunities to end this prior to today. We will move forward. And we got through the rest of day 2. And then on day 3, the only witness left to testify was myself. And that morning, she withdrew her guilty plea and pleaded guilty to all counts of the indictment. And she, again, had the nerve to bring her Bottega Veneta legal portfolio with her and had it during the entire trial. So unfortunately, since I did not get to testify, I didn't get to put fun little pieces of evidence like this in as exhibits, but I will share it with you here today. So this is a text message from Keisha to Chris, where she is saying that she talked to Richie, who was just some other person she was using, saying that he needs an emergency payment of $16,000 to take care of something immediately. And then she goes, he technically needs $16,120.85. To which, when me and my partner are reviewing these text messages, we go, that is a very specific number to tell somebody. And we go look at the bank records, and we see indeed a wire for $16,120.85, the exact amount being sent to the Four Seasons. And we found this invoice that on the same day she sends this text message to Chris, which he gets the money for her, she is wiring $16,000 towards one of her hotel bills. Real quick, Chris did end up getting charged. Unfortunately, at some point, he sort of began lying to people at the end to keep this going. He did not get jail time. We asked for him to only get probation, which he did. And Keisha Williams. So she got hit pretty hard at sentencing because the judge just saw her go through trial and just the extent of what she put these victims through. And she gets to trial, and that Bottega Veneta legal brief again, she just couldn't resist. And she brought it with her to her sentencing. And she gets sentenced to 188 months of jail, 15.5 years, which is a very significant sentence for a white collar offender. She was ordered to repay her $5.4 million. And the best part was when the government brought up the fact that she had the audacity to bring this legal brief with her to her sentencing, which she had purchased with the proceeds of this fraud. And the judge ordered her to turn it over to the government on the spot. And the judge told her, you're not going to need it in prison anyways. And the judge said that the way in which Keisha spent this money was appalling. And it was one of the worst cases she had ever seen, which I think was pretty significant because she has been a judge for over 30 years. And then sadly, the day of sentencing, it was January 18th, 2019. And Joe Sanders had been prepared to come to sentencing and give a victim impact statement. And we had spoken a few days before sentencing, and we arranged that she was going to come and speak. And we get to the day of sentencing, and Joe wasn't there. And I was getting concerned. I called her. There was no answer, but she just never showed up. And I tried calling her after, still nothing. And I finally reached out to her significant other the following day, and I said, you know, here's the news. This is what happened to Keisha, but have you heard from Joe? I'm really concerned. I haven't heard from her. And he broke the news to me that Joe had actually passed away. And she passed away on the same day that Keisha Williams was sentenced. And it was quite a moment. It was emotional, and it was very sad. Joe was the kindest lady I've ever met. And I read in her obituary, somebody commented this quote here that I have. And what I bolded and read there was that Joe would help everyone you came in contact with. And that really was true. And, you know, we see that a lot in these cases where we have victims like Joe. And it's maybe a generational thing, but it's just the kindness and just not thinking that anybody could do something like this. And that was Joe. And, you know, I'll wrap it up, but it was a heartbreaking case to work. You know, we worked hard and were able to recover the very little that was left. Unfortunately, Keisha had spent all of the money. You know, the best we could do was get her a 15.5-year sentence to prevent her from doing this to anyone else. And the impact on the victims in this case was very significant. You know, Chris, he lost everything he had. He lost both of his houses. He lost his business, a successful business that he had worked so hard to grow. He essentially lost his freedom to some point. I mean, he got charged with a federal crime because of this. Joe, she was struggling to pay for her medical bills for her cancer treatment. At the end of the day, she lost her life. Not saying, you know, that was necessarily Keisha's fault. However, I don't think it helped the situation very much. You know, we had a number of other victims that I didn't get to speak about today. One who was younger, but was sending text messages to Keisha that he couldn't afford milk to feed his baby. And Keisha read that. She knew Joe had cancer. She knew that Chris was losing his house and his business and everything he had. And she just didn't care. Keisha was a manipulator, and she manipulated Chris to the fullest extent, telling him she was locked up in Austria, telling him she was sick and miserable in bed. In reality, she was traveling the world and living a life of luxury. And she wouldn't have been able to pull this off if it wasn't for someone like Chris, who was a kind person, respected in the community, had a lot of friends and family that trusted him. And it really is unfortunate. And I wanted to present on this today because while it's not a romance fraud or a tech fraud or a government impersonation that you'll hear about in the coming weeks, and you'll hear about more and more, it's things like these, that frauds like these that do happen every day. They're all around us. The scary part is that a lot of times people do not realize that they're victims, like what happened in this case. And for that reason, they don't get reported. And so that is all I have on the presentation today. Thank you all for joining, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jane, your timing is perfect because our audience members are just starting to put in lots of great questions into the question boxes. So you mentioned, Jamie, that, look, Keisha fooled dozens of people. Do you have, based on your experience working this case and others like it, do you have tips on how to educate, particularly older adults, on how to identify financial frauds like this, or like the romance scams you talked about, or the grandchildren in trouble? Do you have any thoughts that we can help raise some awareness among our audience, how to spot stuff like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the old saying of if it sounds too good to be true, it is. It really, as cliche as it sounds, you know, that is probably the best advice. And something that I think I forgot to mention in this was that these people, they were loaning their money, investing their money to help Chris. But also they were being promised something in return. So they were being told that for their investment, for their loan, they would be getting a 30% return. So hearing, yes, I forgot to mention. So hearing things like that, that should be setting off red flags all over, that is just not realistic. And, you know, it doesn't hurt. It didn't work in this situation, but when you hear something like that, maybe talk to somebody about it, a trusted friend or relative, just to kind of get a second opinion. Always good advice.
Did Keisha herself have any indications of prior fraud schemes before you came to find out about this one?
So the interesting thing is she did not. So she really was not on anyone's radar. Aside from the complaint that we received that became a civil issue, there was nothing. So we really didn't, you know, think much of it until we started digging into it.
It's amazing. Such a huge, complex scheme with no prior evidence of fraud. It's amazing. One of our other attendees asks, what is the first or the best thing to do if we suspect elder abuse or financial exploitation, but the individual that we suspect is being abused is in denial? So if you have someone who doesn't admit that there's something wrong going on, what do you recommend that folks do in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we run into that all the time. And I just changed the slide presentation for where to report fraud. But I recommend that if you're comfortable enough to do this, that you do report it to law enforcement, and someone like myself or another agent that works this could go talk to them. And that might help. It might not, but I've had situations similar where someone, a trusted family member, knows that their family member is being defrauded, but they are refusing to stop sending money. And I've gone to people's homes and told them that, look, these are known scams that people do. And maybe hearing it from a third party and a law enforcement representative, that might help. I know that a lot of times we as humans don't like to, you know, if our family member is telling us something, we might not believe it as much, but if you hear it from a third party, it might sink in. So I recommend that.
That is a fantastic suggestion. And I will say, as someone who many times has faced the question, how do I know you're an FBI agent? You know, one easy way for anyone is to look up the FBI's telephone number wherever you are in the phone book. If you still have a phone book, right, or on the internet, and call the number that's in the phone book, and then you can verify any FBI agent's identity by just saying, hey, I just met this person. Here's her name. Is she actually an agent or not? And we'll tell you, because it's important for people to know that we're legitimate people when we get to you. Yes. A couple of other questions that have come in are talking about red flags. So you talked about, you know, not believing things that sound too good to be true. Someone specifically is asking, were there red flags that the investors might have keyed into to have avoided this scam? Did they have promissory agreements? Were there some kind of other documents that might have raised concerns if folks had read them carefully?
Yeah, so for this situation in particular, there was no documentation. So that should have been a red flag kind of up front, was that there was never a promissory note, there was no agreement, there was nothing in writing. It was all just someone telling you, this is what I'm doing. You know, for the investors that, setting Chris aside, because really they all trusted him, but it was really shame on him because this had been ongoing for years. And this is what got Chris in trouble, was that in the beginning, I can see he fell, you know, victim to Keisha's lies, but it got to the point where this had been ongoing for 2 to 3 years. And she had been telling him that entire time that we need $50,000 by tomorrow or we're going to lose it. And then he got it. He got the $50,000, but then she moved the goalpost. And then it was, ooh, actually, we're going to need another 60,000. And it just continued and continued and continued. And that is not real life. That is a huge red flag. And we see that a lot, not just in this case, but in many investment fraud type cases and other cases that aren't investment frauds, where that constant need for more money and more money, it just continues. And at some point, you have to cut your losses and just stop giving money.
I think we have time for just maybe two more. And one of them is pertaining to Chris. How old was Chris when this whole thing started? Could his age have negatively impacted how he reacted to Keisha or made him more susceptible perhaps to her stories?
Yeah, so Chris was in his late 60s when this began. And that was certainly a concern of ours when we saw his age, was that, you know, we all know what happens as people get older and your mind sort of changes. And so that was a concern. But, you know, after meeting with him, he's smart. He was a very successful businessman. And I don't think it was his age that caused him to, you know, give into her. I think she was just extremely manipulative, and he had to, in his mind, justify keeping this going because he knew he was going to lose everything he put into it if he didn't. But age is always a concern.
Absolutely. And now the last question that I think we have time for today really plays into your strengths as a CPA and your financial awareness. So one of our attendees asks, from a financial analysis standpoint, what are the red flags for these kinds of schemes that fraud or anti-money laundering analysts at banks could look for?
Yeah, great question. For this one, luckily, it was very, what I think is straightforward. The financials, she made it very easy for us. You would, in just looking at bank statements, you would see the money coming in and then immediately just going out for personal expenses. So she would have very little money in her bank account. And then let's say a $20,000 wire would come in from an investor victim. And then within days, that money was just being depleted and expended on personal expenses like travel and luxury retail. And that was the consistent pattern that we were seeing throughout.
So last question for you is going to be about your final words of wisdom, right? I always like to give folks that are on webinars a chance to give one clear takeaway. If you would want attendees for today's webinar to remember one single thing from this case presentation, what would it be?
One thing, I mean, just really awareness that people like this are out there. And this is not meant to scare anyone or to make you not trust anyone like me, but, you know, just know that, you know, I'm very skeptical, but just know that these people are out there. And, you know, sadly, it's sad to say, not everyone is good. Not everyone has good intentions. Look for those red flags. If it's too good to be true, it is. And I know this is more than one thing, but if you do suspect that you are a victim, or even if it's someone that you know, report it. Just, even if you're unsure, please report it. And on my final slide there, I listed multiple ways for that to be done. Even if it's not us, report it to your local law enforcement. Just get it into someone, because even if we are not able to do something in that moment or at that time, it'll be there down the road. If we ever come across this individual again, we can query them and we can see that there have been past complaints. So report, report, report.
Well said, my friend, well said. Thank you so much for sharing your case experience with us today, super helpful. A couple of final words from me, your humble host. Remember that the next session in this series will be a week from today. So next Monday at noon Eastern, we're going to focus on who are the criminals behind the scam. So not just Keisha, but others. Who else is doing this? How are they doing it? So we'll be talking some more about indicators and red flags and how you might suspect that something untoward is going on. Tomorrow, all of you will get an email that confirms your attendance today, that it contains a certificate. You can use that to apply for continuing education credit if that applies to your job. Now, there's also a survey that you'll see both when you exit today and again in tomorrow's email. We'd love to hear what you think about the sessions we put on, if they were helpful or not. We take any constructive criticism you may have, whether it's things that went well or things that we could do better on. So thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. We did record today. The recording will go up in the InfraGard portal for InfraGard members in the next probably 2 days. It'll go up on an FBI.gov page within the FBI's website. That'll take longer because it has to go through headquarters. So bear with us when it's up. I'll make sure that I email all of you so you all know that you can access that and watch it at your leisure and share it with friends or family or colleagues who weren't able to attend today. Finally, a huge thank you to all the co-sponsors of this Elder Justice series, the National Capital Region chapter of InfraGard, the ABA Foundation, the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and AARP. We will look forward to seeing you next week. You'll get the link to register in your email tomorrow. And until then, please everyone stay safe and stay healthy. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.